Hi, today I'd like to spend some time with you exploring a favourite historical case. I am a huge fan of the film The Ghost in the Darkness. It depicts one of the most famous accounts of man-eaters known even today, and it stars Michael Douglas and Val Kilmer in standout roles. It's a fantastic film, though, like most films based on real events, it takes a few creative liberties. So, with that in mind, this is the true story of the Man-Eaters of Tsavo. In the late 19th century, during the construction of a railway across East Africa, two lions began hunting people. Not occasionally, not opportunistically, but repeatedly over the course of nearly 10 months. Night after night, they slipped into camps along the Tsavo River, dragging men from their tents and carrying them away into the darkness. The attacks became so frequent that workers fled the construction site. Some refused to sleep. Others built formed barricades or lit fires through the night. Still, the lions kept coming, each time seemingly striking a different part of camp or a weak point that hadn't been identified. It fell to Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, the British Army officer in charge of building the Tsavo Bridge, to bring their reign of terror to an end. But by the time the killings ended, the legend of the Man-Eaters of Tsavo had been truly established. It is a story of fear, survival, and one of the most famous encounters between humans and predators in history. But more than a century later, new research has revealed something remarkable. Modern science has begun to uncover the secrets of the Man-Eaters of Tsavo and why they may have turned to hunting people. First though, let's look at the chilling local prophecy that may have foretold of the events to come. In 1898, the British Empire was building the Uganda Railway, a massive project intended to link the interior of East Africa with the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean via Lake Victoria and the Nile. The railway cut across the Tsavo region of present-day Kenya, a vast dry landscape of scrubland, riverine, forest and volcanic rock. Tsavo itself was known as the place of slaughter by the Kamba people, who knew it was a place of historical violence and tribal conflict. The British brought in thousands of labourers to construct the new rail line, many of them workers from India. They built camps along the railway as it pushed westward, but local Maasai communities had long warned of the place. According to tradition, a prophecy spoke of an iron snake that would invade their land and bring suffering with it. For many Maasai, the railway itself seemed to fulfill that prophecy, and not long after construction began near the Tsavo River, something else appeared. Two large male lions. And then the killings began. Here is Patterson's account of the first attack, which occurred just days after his own arrival in Tsavo. I was roused one morning about daybreak and told that one of my jemadars, a fine and powerful Sikh named Uganda Singh, had been seized during the night and dragged off and eaten. One of his bedfellows had actually witnessed the occurrence. He graphically described how at about midnight the lion suddenly put its head in at the open tent door and seized Uganda Singh, who happened to be nearest the opening, by the throat. Poor Uganda Singh must have died hard. As a coolie gravely remarked, was he not fighting a lion? Pools of blood marked halting places where he, the lion, indulged the man-eater's habit of licking the skin off so to get at the fresh blood. This act of licking the skin off and the flesh appearing sucked is something Patterson comments on several times when examining victims. And what we now know about the lions may well support this bizarre and unusual behaviour. At first, the attacks seemed isolated, but soon they became a pattern. The lions would approach the camps silently after dark. They learned to tear through the thorn fences known as bombers, and then they dragged men from their tents. Sometimes they entered the camps directly. They never seemed to strike the same place twice, making it impossible to predict or prepare for when the next attack would come. Workers described hearing screams in the night, followed by the sound of something being dragged away into the darkness. Fear spread rapidly. The men refused to work, and some fled the camps entirely. Construction on the railway slowed almost to a halt. In fact, it stopped several times. I think it's also worth looking at what may have led to these lions becoming man-eaters too. For many years, the attacks were treated almost as a mystery of nature. But modern research has offered several possible explanations. One of the most significant factors may have been disease among their prey animals. During this period, a devastating outbreak of rinderpest, often called the Great Camel Plague, swept through East Africa. The epidemic wiped out enormous numbers of grazing animals. In some regions, it was estimated 80 to 90% of the buffalo population, a primary prey species of lions, were eliminated. With their natural prey drastically reduced, predators across the region were forced to adapt. But there may have been another factor as well. These two lions appear to have been nomadic males who were not members of a pride. In lion society, young males are often driven out when they reach maturity. They must wander until they can challenge older males and claim territory of their own. Many never succeed. A pair of wandering brothers would have been under pressure to find food wherever they could, and the camps along the railway offered something unusual. Hundreds of sleeping people, all poorly defended and handily close to a water source. Predators need that to drink a lot to process all that protein. Humans were also possibly becoming increasingly familiar to them. The lions may have already become accustomed to livestock or human remains, which would have lowered their fear of humans as prey. And once predators learn that humans are vulnerable, the behaviour can quickly adapt and escalate. Patterson later claimed that the lions killed 135 people, and that's a number that has been debated hotly for many years. But the historical record complicates the picture. Only the deaths of the Indian railway workers were officially recorded, numbering around about 28. The African labourers working on the railway were largely not counted in colonial records. So the real number of victims is impossible to know with certainty. But it's important to remember that 2 adult male lions were capable of killing frequently. Over a period of 9 to 10 months, the higher estimates are not biologically impossible. And we now know that many aspects of Patterson's overall account have since been supported by later research. Now, more than a century after the attacks, scientists are finally able to examine the lions themselves. The preserved skins and skulls are held today by the Field Museum in Chicago, where the lions are mounted for display. Modern analysis has revealed some remarkable details. For example, we now know the 2 lions were brothers sharing the same mother. Both were approximately 8 years old at the time they were killed, and they both had serious dental damage. One lion had a severely broken canine and a painful infection. Another tooth, though, contained something extraordinary. a compacted plug of organic material taken from the rotting core of the tooth has been found to contain more than 1,000 human hairs. That sample is still being analysed today, but the dental injuries may help explain their behaviour. Lions with damaged teeth often struggle to hunt their usual prey. Large animals such as zebra or buffalo require powerful bites and strong jaws. Humans, by comparison, are far easier prey to bring down and consume. We are the mashed potatoes and flaky fish of the man-eater diet when compared to the tough, overcooked brisket that is their usual fare. And bad teeth are why many big cats, especially, turn to man-eating. Another part of the legend is the lair of the man-eaters. For many years, Patterson described discovering a lion's den filled with human remains. But modern investigation has reinterpreted that discovery. Researchers Dr. Julian Kurbis-Peterhans and Dr. Ogeto Mwebe have studied the location and concluded that the site was most likely a hyena den, not a lion's. Hyenas frequently scavenged the kills of lions. They drag the long bones and limbs back to their dens, as these are easy to snatch and carry away. This interpretation is also supported by Patterson's grim discovery of copper bangles at the site, which had been worn by the victims on their arms. It's understandable how Patterson concluded this was the den of the man-eaters, but everything we now know about lion behaviour and ecology tells us this isn't the case. As Michael Douglas says in the film, lions never had a lair like this. And for once, Hollywood actually got something right. Lions do not typically maintain permanent dens in the way some animals do. And that phrase may have entered Patterson's description as it has through all of ours, which is through cultural language, included biblical references to the lion's den. Here is Patterson's own account of how he took down the first of the man-eaters. The silence of an African jungle on a dark night needs to be experienced to be realised. It is most impressive, especially when one is absolutely alone and isolated from one's fellow creatures, as I was then. I fancied I could hear the rustling of a large body forcing its way through the bush. A deep, long-drawn sigh, sure sign of hunger, came up from the bushes, and the rustling commenced again. In a moment or two, a sudden stop, followed by an angry growl, told me my presence had been noticed. The hunter became the hunted, and the lion began to stealthily stalk me. For about 2 hours, he horrified me by slowly creeping round and round my crazy structure. Patterson had erected a McCann. I heard the lion begin to creep stealthily towards me. I could barely make out his form as he crouched among the whitish undergrowth. But I saw enough for my purpose, and before he could become any nearer, I took a careful aim and pulled the trigger. I left out that this is also the encounter where Patterson had an owl land on his head whilst he was watching and waiting. It's hinted at in the film as well, but that just shows you how still he was lying for hours on end. In the end, at dawn, Patterson followed a blood trail a short way and discovered he had indeed killed the first of the man-eaters, who measured 9 feet and 8 inches. I'll now read the second killing of the man-eater. The second lion proved even harder to stop. It survived multiple attempts to shoot it, and Patterson built elaborate traps. He spent nights waiting on raised platforms, and the lion repeatedly evaded capture. The tension became unbearable. Workers were desperate for the attacks to end, and finally, Patterson shot the second lion after a very long and dangerous pursuit. We join him perched on strong scaffolding over an abandoned goat kill where the man-eater was expected to return. And indeed, it did. I grasped my double smoothbore, which I had charged with slug, and waited patiently. I saw him stealthily emerge into the open and pass almost directly below. I fired both barrels practically together into his shoulder, and to my joy could see him go down under the force of the blow. Quickly, I reached for the magazine rifle, but before I could use it, he was out of sight among the bushes. Patterson then attempts to track the lion for over a mile as soon as daybreak broke, but he loses the trail and he ultimately doesn't find the lion's body. The lion is then not seen for at least 10 days when, in the middle of the night, Patterson hears terrified shouts from his men, claiming a lion is trying to reach them in the tree they are sleeping in, which is just outside his own boma, the barricade made out of thorns. Patterson fires a few shots into the darkness to scare the brute, as he calls them, away, but can't risk going out after it. The next night, Patterson nearly puts his hand on a venomous snake coiled around a branch of the same tree as he positions himself, a habit the protagonist of my novels also seems to have. Patterson doesn't say what kind of snake it is, but boomslangs and both black and green mambas are all found in the area, and all are arboreal in nature. Patterson then spends most of the night in the fruitless vigil for the man-eater. We join him again a few hours before dawn, back in the tree. It was the man-eater, cautiously stalking us. His skill showed he was an old hand at the terrible game of man-hunting, so I was determined to run no undue risk of losing him this time. I accordingly waited until he got quite close, about 20 yards, and then fired my .303 at his chest. I heard the bullet strike him, but unfortunately it had no knockdown effect, for, with a fierce growl, he turned and made off with great long bounds. Before he disappeared from sight, however, I managed to get 3 more shots at him from the magazine rifle, and another growl told me the last of these had also taken effect. We waited for daylight with impatience, and at the first glimmer of dawn, we set out to hunt him down. We had not proceeded more than a quarter of a mile through the jungle when suddenly a fierce warning growl was heard right in front of us. Looking cautiously through the bushes, I could see the man-eater glaring out in our direction and showing his tusks in an angry snarl. I at once took careful aim and fired. Instantly, he sprang out and made a most determined charge down on us. I fired again and knocked him over, but in a second he was up once more and coming for me as fast as he could in his crippled condition. A third shot had no apparent effect, so I put my hand out for the martini. This is a type of rifle that Patterson had left with his gun bearer. To my dismay, though, it was not there. The terror of the sudden charge had proved too much for Mahina, the name of the gun bearer, and by this time both he and the carbine were well on their way up the nearest tree. In the circumstances, there was nothing to do but follow suit. Patterson then recovers the rifle from the gun bearer in the tree. He makes a shot, which floors the animal, but as he approaches, the lion jumps up for a final charge. This is when Patterson fires a final duo of rounds into the head and chest of the lion. As Patterson describes, he dropped not 5 yards from me and died gamely, biting savagely at a branch which had fallen to the ground. The second man-eater was dead and measured 9 feet 6 inches and stood nearly 4 foot at the shoulder. Patterson also said, "In the whole of my life, I have never experienced anything more nerve-shaking than to hear the deep roars of these dreadful monsters growing gradually nearer and nearer, and to know that one or other of us was doomed." Imagine living with that kind of terror for nearly 10 months. Today, the Tsavo lions remain among the most famous man-eaters in history. To date, they are still the only man-eaters that have ever been discussed in British Parliament. The story sits at the intersection of history, ecology and myth. It includes colonial railway construction, local prophecy, and predators adapting to a disrupted ecosystem. It also includes the uneasy reality that sometimes wild animals learn to hunt humans. But modern science has also humanised the story in unexpected ways. These lions were not supernatural monsters. They were 2 ageing brothers, nomadic, injured, and living in a landscape where disease had already devastated their prey. Understanding that context does not erase the tragedy, but it reminds us that the boundary between human history and wildlife ecology has always been fragile. The Tsavo lions were eventually preserved, studied and displayed. Their skins now stand in the Field Museum in Chicago, silent witnesses to one of the most remarkable predator stories ever recorded. But even today, more than a century later, the mystery is not completely solved. And somewhere in the dry forests along the Tsavo River, the wind still moves through the same thorn trees. The lions are gone, but the story remains. My second novel, The Daughters of the Darkness, explores what just might happen if the legacy of the Ghost in the Darkness continues today. If you like what you've heard here, you can find it on Amazon, Audible and Kindle, and there'll be a link in the description. I hope you'll join me for more stories of cryptids, man-eaters, animal attacks and my own writing very soon. Thank you as always for watching.